Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku picked up Mjolnir and became worthy. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The salt-laced wind was a familiar companion now, a constant whisper against Izuku Midoriya's skin. For 10 long months, it had carried the stench of decay and rust from the mountain of illegally dumped trash that had once choked Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Now, it carried only the clean, briny scent of the sea. It smelled of victory. Izuku's muscles screamed a different story. They screamed of exhaustion, of micro-tears repaired and retorn 1,000 times over, of a body pushed so far beyond its natural limits that pain had become a baseline state of being. He leaned against the seawall, his breath coming in ragged, shuddering gasps that fogged the cool evening air. His oversized sweatpants and t-shirt, once comically large, were now merely loose, hanging off a frame of hard-won, wiry muscle. Before him, the beach was a testament to his ordeal. The last rays of a setting sun painted the sand in hues of orange and gold, glinting off the gentle waves that lapped at a shoreline now pristine and clear. The final colossal pile of debris, a gnarled monument of rusted appliances and shattered furniture, was gone. He'd hauled the last piece, a warped refrigerator chassis, to the pickup zone just an hour ago. His gaze drifted to the tire of a giant earth mover, its rubber worn smooth. He'd pulled that, with All Might sitting on top of it, just this morning. The memory sent a fresh wave of agony through his shoulders, but it was accompanied by a surge of pride so fierce it almost brought tears to his eyes. He had done it. He had cleaned the entire beach. He had made his body a worthy vessel. A shadow fell over him, vast and comforting. Young Midoriya, Izuku straightened up as best he could, turning to face his mentor. All Might stood there in his skeletal form, Toshinori Yagi, a gentle smile on his thin face. He held out a water bottle, which Izuku took with a grateful, mumbled, "Thank you. You have done exceptionally well," Toshinori said, his voice soft but filled with an undeniable pride that made Izuku's chest swell. "I confess, when I first laid out this plan, I worried it was too much, an impossible task designed to weed out the uncommitted. But you never faltered. You took my American dream plan and made it your own Japanese reality." He gestured to the immaculate beach. "Look at this. You did not just prepare your body. You gave something back to the community. You performed a feat of quiet, unsung heroism long before you'll ever wear a costume. This, my boy, is the heart of a true hero." Izuku's face flushed, and he ducked his head, unable to meet the hero's gaze. I only did what you told me to, All Might. You're the one who gave me the chance." Toshinori chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I merely opened the door. You are the one who has spent 10 months charging through it with everything you have. Now for your reward." He reached into the pocket of his cargo pants, and pulled out a single strand of his golden hair. It caught the last light of the sun, glowing like a filament of pure energy. Izuku's breath hitched. This was it. The moment his entire life, all his dreams, all his suffering, had been leading up to. "The UE entrance exam is in 3 days, Toshinori said, his tone turning solemn. "Your body is prepared. Now, it is time to stoke the furnace. To inherit the sacred torch." He held the hair out to Izuku. "Eat this." Izuku stared. Of all the things he had imagined this moment would be, this was not one of them. "Ha! To inherit my power, you must intake some of my DNA. That's how it works," Toshinori explained, a faint blush on his own cheeks. "It's not the most glamorous part of the process, I admit." Izuku's mind reeled. 10 months of grueling, backbreaking, borderline inhuman labor. 10 months of dreaming of the awesome, reality-defying power of One for All. And the final step was this. He looked from the single hair to All Might's dead serious face. A hysterical giggle bubbled up in his throat. It was so absurd, so mundane and yet so monumental, that all he could do was laugh. Toshinori's expression softened. "The power you are about to receive is no laughing matter, my boy. It is a force cultivated by 8 generations of wielders, a reservoir of stockpiled energy that can level city blocks. In your unprepared body, a single 100% punch would have turned your limbs into liquid. Even now, you will need to be careful. Think of an egg in a microwave. That is what will happen if you are not cautious. Izuku's laughter died down, replaced by a sobering awe. He took the hair with trembling fingers. It felt like nothing, just a hair. But it was everything. It was hope. It was a future. I understand, Izuku said, his voice thick with emotion. I won't let you down, All Might. I'll make this power my own. I'll make you proud. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and swallowed the hair. It went down with a gulp of water, and for a moment, nothing happened. He waited for a flash of light, a surge of power, a feeling of cosmic change. There was only the taste of water and the burn in his tired muscles. It will take some time to metabolize, Tashinori said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. It was a bony, frail hand, but it felt as steady as a mountain. A few hours, most likely. Go home, get a hot meal and a long night's sleep. Your work here is done. From tomorrow, we begin a new kind of training, learning how to not explode. Izuku nodded, his mind a whirlwind. He wanted to say more, to express the bottomless well of gratitude he felt, but the words wouldn't form. A simple, heartfelt, thank you, was all he could manage. Rest, young Midoriya, All Might said, turning to leave. You have more than earned it. Izuku watched him go, a thin silhouette against the deepening twilight, until he disappeared behind the sea wall. For a long time, Izuku just stood there, alone on the shore. He was no longer quirkless. He was the ninth inheritor of One for All. The thought was so immense it felt like it might split his skull open. A dizzying mix of terror and elation churned in his stomach. He turned back to the sea, letting the cool breeze wash over him. He wasn't ready to go home yet. He wanted to savor this moment, this liminal space between the person he was and the person he was about to become. He walked along the water's edge, the damp sand cool beneath his worn-out sneakers. He thought about his journey. The jeers of his classmates. The pitying looks from his teachers. Bakugo's explosive rage and cruel taunts. The crushing, final-sounding words of the doctors. You should probably give up. He thought of his mother's tears, her desperate apology that still echoed in his heart. And then he thought of All Might's words, a beacon in the darkness. You too can become a hero. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. He clenched his fists. The muscles in his arms, hard and defined, bunched in response. He still felt like the same old Deku inside, scared, anxious, prone to overanalyzing, but his reflection in the water's surface told a different story. He was stronger. He was ready. Or was he? The anxiety, a familiar and unwelcome friend, crept back in. 3 days. He had 3 days to get a handle on a power that could liquefy his bones. What if he couldn't? What if he failed the exam? What if he disgraced the legacy of One for All before he even began? His mind started to spiral, the old habits of self-doubt dying hard. Stop it, he muttered to himself, his voice sharp. Think like All Might. Be positive. He decided to do one last sweep of the area, a final patrol to cement the feeling of accomplishment, and push the negativity away. He walked towards the far end of the beach, near the towering cliffs that bordered the park. This area had been the worst, a dumping ground for construction debris where shattered concrete and rusted rebar lay half-buried like the bones of ancient monsters. He'd cleared it all, but his obsessive nature demanded a final check. That was when the ground trembled. It wasn't a violent earthquake, not the kind that sent people screaming into the streets. It was a low, deep shudder, a groan from the earth itself that vibrated up through the soles of his shoes and into his bones. It was localized, sharp, and over in a second. Izuku stumbled, catching his balance on a piece of driftwood. He looked around, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs for a completely different reason. The sea was calm. The city behind him was quiet. Then he heard a sound that turned his blood to ice. The grinding, crackling roar of rock giving way. His head snapped towards the cliffs. High above, a section of the weathered rock face, likely destabilized by the tremor, was peeling away. A shower of pebbles and dust cascaded down, followed by a horrifyingly large slab of rock and earth. It wasn't a full-on landslide, but it was more than enough, and it was heading straight for the narrow public access path that ran along the base of the cliff. His eyes widened in horror as he saw a figure on that path. An elderly woman, out for an evening stroll, her back to the danger. She had a small dog on a leash, a fluffy white creature that had started barking frantically at the sky. "Look out!" Izuku screamed, his voice raw. The woman turned, her eyes widening in confusion and then dawning terror. She was frozen for a crucial second, a deer in the headlights of an oncoming mountain. The dog, yanking on its leash, pulled her just enough that the main brunt of the rockfall missed her, crashing down onto the path right behind her with a deafening boom that shook the very air. But she wasn't clear. A secondary piece of debris, a massive, jagged slab of old concrete reinforced with rebar, probably part of the cliff's old retaining wall, tore loose and slammed down, pinning her by the legs. A choke scream was cut off by the impact. The world fell silent, save for the frantic yapping of the little dog and the settling of dust. Izuku didn't think. He didn't analyze. He didn't weigh his options. His body, honed by 10 months of relentless reaction training, was already moving. He sprinted across the sand, his powerful new leg muscles propelling him forward faster than he'd ever run in his life. The 50 yards felt like a mile. He reached her in seconds, his mind a maelstrom of panic. "Ma'am! Ma'am, are you okay? Can you hear me?" The woman, who he could now see had kind, wrinkled eyes filled with agony, let out a pained gasp. My legs! I can't feel them." Izuku's gaze dropped to the slab of concrete. It was immense, at least a ton of solid, unforgiving weight. It lay across her lower legs, pinning her to the asphalt path. Blood was already beginning to pool beneath it. He had to get it off her. "Now, okay, don't worry, I'm going to get you out," he said, his voice shaking but laced with a desperate authority. He jammed his fingers under the edge of the slab. The concrete was rough and bit into his skin. He took a deep breath, trying to summon the memory of pulling that earth mover tire. He thought of One for All, wondering if it had kicked in yet. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and pulled. Every muscle in his back, shoulders, and arms ignited with white-hot fire. The slab didn't budge. Not a millimeter. It was too heavy, the angle was wrong, and he was just one exhausted teenager. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his adrenaline. He was failing. Just like he always had. He was powerless to help someone right in front of him. The feeling was a nauseating echo of his entire life before All Might. "Please help," the woman whispered, her face pale and slick with sweat. I will," he grunted, straining again, tears of frustration and agony welling in his eyes. His muscles screamed in protest, threatening to tear from the bone. It was no use. He couldn't do it. He was going to watch her die. His desperate, tear-filled eyes scanned the surrounding debris, looking for anything, a lever, a crowbar, a miracle. And then he saw it, half buried in the sand and freshly churned earth from the landslide, no more than 10 feet away, was an object that didn't belong. It wasn't a piece of rusted rebar or shattered plastic. It was a hammer, but it was unlike any hammer he had ever seen. The head was a solid block of dull, grayish metal, scarred and pitted as if it had survived countless battles. It had no claw, just 2 square, flat faces. It was attached to a short, thick handle wrapped in well-worn brown leather. It looked ancient, primitive, and utterly out of place. It seemed to hum, not with sound, but with a palpable energy that made the air around it shimmer almost imperceptibly. A strange, deep thrumming that seemed to call to something deep within his soul. In his desperate, frantic mind, a single, logical thought formed: leverage. If he could get the hammer, he could use it as a fulcrum, wedge it under the slab, maybe gain just enough of an advantage. He scrambled over to it, his knees sinking into the soft earth. He wrapped his hands around the leather-wrapped handle. It was cool to the touch, and the leather felt impossibly old yet perfectly preserved. His mind wasn't on the strangeness of the object, only on the woman pinned under the concrete. His entire being, every fiber of his soul, was focused on a single, selfless, all-consuming thought. I have to save her. I don't care what it takes. Even if it breaks me, I have to save her. The instant his fingers closed fully around the grip, The universe tilted on its axis. It was not a sensation. It was an event. A bolt of pure, untamed energy, older than mountains and brighter than suns, surged up his arm. It wasn't the fiery burn of one for all he had been anticipating. It was something else entirely. It was the roar of a cosmic storm, the light of a dying star, the weight of a solemn oath sworn at the dawn of time. His mind, his very consciousness, was ripped open. Images, feelings, and knowledge that were not his own flooded his brain. He saw a forge burning with the heart of a star. He felt the wild joy of soaring through nebulae of brilliant color. He heard the clash of armies on a rainbow bridge and the sorrow of a king mourning a lost son. He smelled the ozone of 1,000 lightning strikes and tasted the bitter ashes of a fallen kingdom. It was 1,000,000,000 lifetimes of experience, of nobility, of battle, of failure, of worth, crammed into a single, blinding millisecond. And through the cataclysmic torrent of sensation, a single phrase burned itself into his mind's eye, not as words on a page but as an intrinsic, undeniable truth. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. His eyes, wide with shock, snapped open. The pain in his muscles was gone, replaced by a feeling of infinite, surging power. He looked down at the hammer in his hand. The expected weight, the impossible density he should have felt, wasn't there. It felt light. It felt right. Like it was an extension of his own arm, a missing piece of his soul he never knew he'd lost. A crackle, sharp and loud, ripped through the air. He looked down at his arm. A brilliant, electric blue tracery of lightning was erupting from the hammer, crawling up his forearm like incandescent vines. It danced over his skin, a living storm in miniature, and where it touched the faint, nascent green aura of one for all that had just begun to stir within him, the two colors swirled together into a magnificent, tempestuous vortex of blue-green light. The air grew thick, charged with static, and the smell of ozone was overpowering. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't have time to. He only knew that the woman was in danger, and he now had the power to save her. He turned back to the concrete slab, the hammer held tight in his grip. He didn't think about leverage anymore. He didn't think about physics. He acted on a primal, newfound instinct. With a cry that was torn from his throat, a sound that was half scream, half thunderclap, he swung. He didn't aim to pry or to lever. He aimed to strike. The hammer connected with the center of the massive concrete slab. The resulting sound was not an impact. It was a detonation. A sonic boom and a peal of thunder rolled into one, a sound so loud it seemed to shatter the air itself. A blinding flash of blue-green light erupted from the point of contact, vaporizing the dust and sand around it. The slab of concrete did not crack. It did not break. It disintegrated. It exploded into a cloud of fine, gray powder and harmless pebbles that showered the area, leaving nothing behind but the indentation in the asphalt where it had lain. The shockwave of the blow threw Izuku back a step. The woman, now free, cried out in shock, her legs bruised and bleeding but no longer crushed. The little white dog, which had been cowering, fell silent, its fur standing on end from the static charge in the air. Silence descended, profound and absolute. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves, oblivious to the divine event that had just transpired. Izuku stood there, panting, his arms still alight with a faint, crackling blue energy. He stared at his hand, at the ancient, impossible hammer it held. His mind was a blank slate of shock. What was this? A quirk? But he hadn't had a quirk a minute ago. Was this one for all? It felt nothing like what All Might had described. It felt ancient, elemental, divine. Shall possess the power of Thor. The words echoed in the stunned silence of his mind. Thor, the god of thunder. From pre-quirk mythology. It was impossible. It was insane. He looked up at the sky. Where there had been a clear, twilight evening just moments before, a storm was gathering. Dark, heavy clouds boiled into existence from nowhere, churning directly above him. The wind whipped his hair and clothes, no longer a gentle sea breeze but the herald of a furious squall. A low, ominous rumble of thunder rolled through the heavens, a deep, resonant bass note that vibrated in his chest. It was not a natural storm. He knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that the storm was answering the hammer. That it was answering him. He stood on the shore of Dagoba Beach, the legacy of 8 heroes just beginning to settle in his blood, and the power of a literal god humming in his hand. He had come here to become a hero. He had just become something else entirely. And as the first fat drops of rain began to fall from the sky he now commanded, Izuku Midoriya could only stare at the impossible hammer, his heart pounding with a single, terrifying, exhilarating question. What have I done? The silence that followed the hammer's blow was a physical presence. It pressed in on Izuku, heavier and more profound than the concrete slab that was now a mere memory of fine gray dust. The air, thick with the smell of ozone and rain, was utterly still save for the frantic, ragged pumping of his own lungs. His arm, wreathed in a fading corona of blue lightning, trembled not from exertion, but from sheer, undiluted shock. He stared at the hammer in his hand, Mjolnir, a name that had been branded into his consciousness, and his mind was a roaring void. The deluge of cosmic knowledge had receded, leaving behind fractured echoes, a star-forged furnace, a rainbow bridge, a king's grief. It was too much. His brain, already prone to short-circuiting over far less stressful stimuli, simply refused to process the input. A pained whimper broke the spell. His head snapped up. The woman. He'd forgotten the woman. The hero-in-training part of his brain, the only part not currently paralyzed by divine revelation, kicked into gear. He stumbled forward, the hammer feeling strangely light, an anchor of impossible reality in his grip. "Ma'am! Are you all right?" he asked, his voice cracking. The elderly woman was propped up on her elbows, staring at him with eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Her legs, bruised and bleeding but mercifully intact, were free. Her little white dog was huddled against her side, shivering. She wasn't looking at her injuries. She was looking at him, at the faint blue spark still dancing on his knuckles, at the ancient weapon he held. "You, the concrete," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. It vanished, and the lightning." Her gaze was one of profound fear, the kind of fear reserved for monsters and gods, not for teenage boys in sweaty gym clothes. What are you?" The question struck Izuku harder than any physical blow. "What am I?" A week ago, he was quirkless. An hour ago, he was the chosen successor to the symbol of peace. And now he was a boy holding a god's hammer while a personal thunderstorm gathered over his head. Before he could even attempt to form a coherent, non-insane-sounding answer, a new sound cut through the air. Not the rumble of thunder, but the frantic pounding of footsteps on asphalt, accompanied by a familiar, hacking cough. A skeletal figure rounded the curve of the cliff path, his form silhouetted against the distant city lights. Even in his emaciated state, he moved with an unnatural speed born of desperation. His sunken eyes were wide, scanning the scene of devastation, the cratered path, the dust-covered woman, the unnatural storm clouds, before they finally landed on Izuku. "Young Midoriya!" Toshinori Yagi gasped, his voice tight with alarm. He skidded to a halt, his gaze locking onto the hammer in Izuku's hand and the electric blue energy still clinging to him like a second skin. All the color drained from his already pale face. For a moment, the number one hero, the symbol of peace, was speechless. He stared at his successor, his carefully laid plans for the future of One for All, plans built on discretion, careful training, and a slow ramp-up of power, lying in shattered ruins at his feet, seemingly obliterated by a mythological artifact. "All Might!" Izuku cried out, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees washing over him. He wasn't alone with this madness anymore. Toshinori's heroic instincts, buried under a momentary avalanche of shock, resurfaced. He took in the scene with a practiced eye, the injured civilian, the panicked boy, the impossible variable. "First things first. Stay right there, my boy," he commanded, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual authority. He rushed to the woman's side, his movements swift and reassuring. "Ma'am, I'm here to help. An ambulance is on its way. Can you tell me your name?" He smoothly and expertly took control of the situation, his calm presence a balm on the woman's terror. He used his jacket to apply pressure to the worst of the bleeding on her legs, speaking in low, soothing tones. As he worked, he surreptitiously glanced at Izuku, his eyes filled with 1,000 frantic questions. Izuku could only stand there mutely, feeling like a child who had broken the world's most expensive vase. The hammer in his hand felt less like a tool of salvation and more like the evidence of a crime he didn't understand. Worse, he couldn't seem to let go of it. His fingers were locked around the leather grip, not by his own volition, but by some external force. The blue energy, which had faded to a faint hum, pulsed gently in time with his frantic heartbeat. He tried to will his fingers to open, but they refused to obey, as if the hammer had decided it wasn't done with him yet. Panic began to claw its way up his throat. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Tashinori shot him a look, sharp and meaningful. Hide it. Izuku looked down at the glowing, ancient war hammer fused to his hand. Hide it where? In his pocket? The absurdity of the situation was verging on hysterical. He did the only thing he could think of. He jammed his hammer-wielding hand behind his back, trying to appear as casual as a person could while actively defying the laws of physics. The paramedics arrived, their professional calm faltering for a moment as they took in the bizarre scene. The perfectly pulverized concrete dust, the localized storm, the strangely grim-faced skeletal man, and the unnaturally tense teenager trying to hide behind his own back. Tashinori, however, was a master of misdirection. A freak accident, he explained to the paramedics and the two police officers who followed, his voice projecting an aura of complete credibility. The tremor must have loosened the cliffside. A piece of old, poorly made construction debris fell and trapped this poor woman. There was a sudden, intense electrical discharge, likely from some buried, severed power line struck by the falling rock. It's a miracle the boy here wasn't hurt. It was a plausible, if slightly stretched, explanation in a world of quirks. A weak electrical quirk, a geological anomaly, it was enough to satisfy a cursory report. The authorities were more concerned with the injured civilian. As they carefully loaded the woman onto a stretcher, she kept casting frightened, confused glances at Izuku, who was doing his best to look small and insignificant. Tashinori stayed until the ambulance pulled away, ensuring the scene was secure and no further questions were asked of his successor. When he finally returned, the police cars were gone, and the beach was once again shrouded in twilight and silence. The unnatural storm clouds, though no longer roiling, still hung heavy and dark overhead, a silent testament to the evening's events. He walked slowly towards Izuku, his face a mask of grim exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the hammer that Izuku still held awkwardly behind his back. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Start from the beginning. And please do not leave out a single detail, no matter how insane it sounds." Izuku's resolve crumbled. The dam of his composure broke, and the story came tumbling out in a frantic, stammering torrent. He explained the tremor, the falling slab, the woman's scream. He described his own powerlessness, the sheer, crushing weight of the concrete, and the desperation that had consumed him. "And I couldn't lift it, all might. I tried, I really did, but it wouldn't move, and she was bleeding, and I thought she was going to die right in front of me." His voice hitched, tears welling in his eyes. "I was useless. Just like always." Tashinori listened patiently, his expression unreadable. "Then I saw it," Izuku continued, his voice dropping. He slowly brought his right arm from behind his back. The hammer, Mjolnir, was revealed, humming with a soft blue light in the gloom. "It was just there, buried in the sand. I thought I could use it for leverage, as a tool." He looked down at the weapon, his knuckles white where they gripped the handle. "I grabbed it. And the only thing I was thinking was that I had to save her. That's all. And then..." He faltered, struggling to find the words. It was like my head split open. There was light. And noise. And images. A forge, a rainbow, a king. It was too much. And I heard, no, I knew, a sentence. It said, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading with his mentor to believe him, to not think he'd gone completely insane. And then I just swung. I didn't even think about it. And the concrete, it just exploded. Tashinori was silent for a long, heavy moment. He walked closer, his gaze fixed on the hammer. He saw the ancient, battle-scarred metal, the simple, functional design that spoke of an age-long past. He could feel the power radiating from it, a low thrum that was utterly alien to him. It was not the fiery energy of a quirk. It was something older, something deeper. Thor, Toshinori breathed, the name tasting strange on his tongue. The god of thunder. From Old Norse mythology. I know it sounds crazy, Izuku said, his voice rising in panic. But that's what happened. And now, I can't let go. It stuck to my hand. This new piece of information seemed to shake Toshinori from his stupor. Stuck? Let me see. He reached out, not for the hammer itself, but for Izuku's hand. He gently tried to pry the boy's fingers open. They were rigid, locked in place as if cast from iron. It wasn't muscle tension, it felt fundamental, as if the molecules of Izuku's hand and the hammer's handle had become one. Incredible! Toshinori murmured, a scientist's curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. He leaned in closer, examining the point where flesh met leather. The blue energy seemed to be the source of the bond, a living, magical adhesive. He then shifted his attention to the hammer itself. May I? Izuku nodded numbly. Toshinori wrapped his own thin, bony hands around the stone-like head of the hammer, which was still attached to Izuku's arm. He braced himself and pulled. Nothing. He repositioned his grip, planted his feet, and pulled with all the strength his withered form could muster. The hammer did not move. It was like trying to pull a mountain by one of its pebbles. Izuku, a boy who weighed no more than 60 kilograms, was utterly immovable, anchored to the spot by the weapon in his hand. Toshinori stepped back, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Awe and terror warred on his face. It's real. Everything you said? It has to be. He looked from the hammer to Izuku's terrified face. My boy, what have you found? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Izuku just shook his head, fresh tears tracing paths through the grime on his cheeks. I don't know. I don't know what this is. Okay, Toshinori said, forcing a calm he did not feel. He was the adult. He was the mentor. He had to be in control. Let's be logical. The inscription you mentioned. If he'd be worthy, you picked it up when you were acting selflessly, trying to save a life at any cost. That act, your inherent nature, must have deemed you worthy. He began to pace, his mind working furiously, connecting impossible dots. This is not a quirk. Quirks are a biological phenomenon. This is something else. Something magical. Something ancient that has lain dormant, waiting. He stopped and looked Izuku square in the eye, his expression deadly serious. Young Midoriya, listen to me very carefully. The secret of One for All was the most important thing in your life. This new secret is exponentially greater. One for All is a power that can be passed on, a quirk of genetics and will. It is, at its core, human. This, he gestured to the hammer, is not. If word of this were to get out, that a teenage boy found a mythical weapon of divine power, it wouldn't just be villains who would come for you. It would be governments. Armies. Every powerful organization on the planet would stop at nothing to control you and that hammer. Your life as you know it would be over. You would become a weapon, a prisoner. Do you understand? The gravity of his words settled on Izuku like a physical weight, pressing the air from his lungs. He thought his world had already changed forever when he inherited One for All. He was wrong. That was merely the prologue. This was the real story, and it was a terrifying one. I understand, he whispered, his throat dry. This secret must be guarded above all else. Toshinori continued. Only you and I can ever know the truth. We will tell no one. Not the school. Not the other heroes. No one. Izuku nodded, his mind reeling. 2 world-altering secrets. He was a vault for the 2 greatest powers on the planet. The pressure was immense. And the 2 powers? Toshinori murmured, his gaze distant. You said you felt them? The blue lightning and the green of One for All. Izuku nodded. It was like they mixed. The blue energy wrapped around the green. It felt stable. When I hit the concrete, it didn't feel like my arm was going to explode. It felt contained. Focused. A flicker of something, hope? Intrigue, crossed Tashinori's face. Is it possible? Could this divine energy act as a natural conduit for one for all? A way to channel it without destroying your body? It was a wild, desperate theory, but in a world where mythical hammers were real, anything seemed possible. That would be a miracle, but also a horrifyingly volatile combination, like mixing gasoline and lightning. His mind was racing. I will begin researching. Immediately. Old texts, pre-Quirk mythology, classified archives I may have access to. I will find out everything I can about Thor, about this Mjolnir, and about what it means for you to be its wielder. He looked at Izuku, his expression softening with paternal concern. But our immediate problem is more practical. The UA entrance exam is in 2 days. Izuku's heart plummeted. He'd completely forgotten. You have to learn to control this, Tashinori said, gesturing to the hammer. And you have to learn to let go of it. You cannot walk into the exam hall holding a glowing Norse war hammer. The simple, practical statement was so at odds with the cosmic scale of their conversation that Izuku almost laughed. I'm trying. It won't let me, he said, his voice laced with hysteria. Think, my boy, think, Tashinori urged, his teacher persona taking over. The inscription. The worthiness. It is all tied to your intent. You picked it up with a singular, desperate purpose. What is your purpose now? Your mind is a storm of panic and fear. The hammer is responding to that. You must calm the storm inside you before you can calm the one in the sky. Izuku stared at his mentor, Tashinori's words cutting through his panic. Calm the storm inside. He had been fighting the hammer, trying to force his will upon it. But maybe that was the wrong approach. It wasn't a tool to be commanded. It was a power to be befriended. He closed his eyes, shutting out the dark clouds and the impossible reality. He forced his breathing to slow, just as All Might had taught him in their early meditation exercises. He ignored the hum of power in his arm and the phantom weight of the hammer. He focused on the feeling of the sea breeze, the sound of the gentle waves. He let go of the fear. He let go of the confusion. He let go of the desperate need to control the situation. He thought back to the moment of worthiness. The selfless drive to save someone. The inscription hadn't said, "Whosoever is strong enough" or "Whosoever is smart enough." It said, "Whosoever is worthy." Worthiness wasn't a permanent state. It was a moment. A choice. And if he could choose to be worthy of picking it up, perhaps he could choose to be at peace. To release the burden, he didn't try to force his fingers open. Instead, he simply let go. In his mind, he relinquished his claim. He accepted the power, thanked it for its help, and gave it permission to rest. A deep sigh escaped his lips. When he opened his eyes, the blue lightning had vanished. The insistent hum in his bones had quieted to a dormant silence. He looked down at his hand. His fingers, no longer locked in a death grip, felt his own again. Slowly, tentatively, he uncurled them. They opened freely. The hammer remained in his open palm for a second, balanced perfectly, before he carefully lowered his hand. He placed the hammer on the damp sand at his feet. Thud. The sound was shockingly mundane, a simple, heavy weight settling into the earth. The moment it left his hand, he felt the loss of connection, like a switch being flipped. A great weight, not physical but spiritual, lifted from his shoulders. Above them, the dark, churning clouds immediately began to thin, the unnatural pressure in the atmosphere dissipating as the moonlight broke through once more. Izuku stared down at the hammer, now just an old, strange object lying in the sand. He felt a profound sense of exhaustion wash over him, a bone-deep weariness that went far beyond mere physical exertion. Tashinori let out a long, shuddering breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Well done, my boy!" "Well done." He stepped forward and crouched beside the hammer. He looked at it, his expression a mixture of reverence and deep-seated caution. "So this is Mjolnir." He reached out, his hand hovering over the leather-wrapped handle. He glanced at Izuku, a silent question in his eyes. Izuku nodded. Tashinori wrapped his fingers around the handle. He braced himself, expecting the same unyielding resistance. He pulled. The hammer didn't budge. It was as if it were fused to the core of the planet. He strained harder, the muscles in his thin arm cording with effort. A pathetic grunt escaped his lips. Nothing. It didn't move, not a fraction of an inch. He let go, panting, and stared at his hand as if it had betrayed him. "It's not that it's heavy," he said, his voice filled with a stunned disbelief that mirrored Izuku's own. "It's not a question of strength at all. It's absolute. It simply will not let me." He looked up at Izuku, and for the first time, the boy saw something truly rare in his mentor's eyes, a flicker of fear, not for himself, but for the sheer, terrifying scale of the power that had just fallen into his successor's lap. "It has chosen you, young Midoriya," he said, his voice low. "For better or for worse, this burden is now yours to bear." Izuku looked down at the hammer, then at his own trembling hands. One for all. Mjolnir. The legacy of heroes and the power of a god. The weight of two worlds was settling on his shoulders, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to stand. What do I do with it?" Izuku asked, the practical question sounding absurdly small. "I can't just leave it here." "No," Toshinori agreed, his mind already shifting to logistics. "You certainly cannot." "Can you pick it up again?" Izuku hesitated. He reached down, his fingers brushing against the cool leather. He took a breath, cleared his mind of everything but the simple intent to lift, and closed his hand around the grip. He pulled. It lifted from the sand with the ease of a child's toy. The moment it was in his grasp, he felt the dormant connection re-establish itself, a low, quiet hum deep within his soul. There was no surge of lightning this time. The power was quiescent, waiting for his call. "All right," Toshinori said, nodding grimly. "Here's the plan. You will take that home. You will hide it somewhere no one, not even your mother, will ever find it. The next 2 days you will not leave your room, you will not go to the beach. You will sit with this hammer, and you will practice. You will practice summoning a single spark. You will practice letting it go. You will learn the bare minimum of control necessary to not accidentally level the exam site. We will speak on the phone every few hours. Understood?" "Yes, All Might," Izuku said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Go now," Toshinori said, placing a reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. "And Izuku," Izuku looked up. "Be careful," the hero said, his voice filled with a heavy, paternal worry. "You are walking a path no one in history has ever walked before. The world is not ready for you, and I fear you are not yet ready for the world." With a final, meaningful look, Toshinori turned and walked away, a frail silhouette disappearing into the night, leaving Izuku alone with his destiny lying heavy in his hand. The walk home was a blur. Izuku tucked the hammerhead into the waistband of his sweatpants, pulling his oversized t-shirt down to cover it. It felt strange and heavy against his back, a constant, tangible reminder of the impossible secret he was now carrying. Every person he passed on the street, every car that drove by, felt like a potential threat, a prying eye that might somehow see through his clothes and glimpse the divine weapon hidden beneath. He reached his apartment building, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He fumbled with his keys, his hands still shaking. He slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as he could. "Izuku? Is that you, honey?" His mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Yeah, Mom! I'm back!" He called out, trying to sound normal, to sound like the same boy who had left that morning. He scurried to his room, the hammer bumping against his spine. He closed his bedroom door, leaning against it with a deep, shuddering sigh. He was home. He was safe. He pulled Mjolnir from his waistband and stared at it. In the warm, familiar light of his All Might-themed bedroom, it looked even more ancient and out of place. He set it gently on the floor next to his desk, where it sat looking ominous and powerful amidst his hero figure collection. The weight of the last hour, the last 10 months, crashed down on him all at once. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was quirkless. He was the inheritor of One for All. He was the wielder of Mjolnir. He was worthy. He was terrified. He sank onto his bed, burying his face in his hands. The 9th wielder of a sacred torch, and the new master of a god's thunder. 2 days. He had 2 days to learn how to carry the weight of 2 worlds, or risk being crushed beneath them. The 2 days that followed were the longest and most frantic of Izuku Midoriya's life. They made the 10 months of grueling physical labor at Dagoba Beach feel like a leisurely vacation. His bedroom, once a sanctuary dedicated to the worship of heroes, became a clandestine laboratory for impossible science and forbidden magic. The All Might posters lining his walls seemed to watch him with a mixture of pride and profound concern. The hammer, Mjolnir, was a constant, brooding presence. He kept it hidden under a pile of old clothes in the bottom of his closet, a location that felt laughably inadequate for concealing a divine artifact. Every time his mother knocked on his door to bring him a meal, worried by his sudden, intense desire for focused study, he would jump, his heart seizing with the irrational fear that she would somehow see through the wood and plaster to the god weapon within. Sleep was a fleeting, feverish affair. When he did manage to drift off, his dreams were a chaotic tempest of fragmented memories that were not his own. He soared through star-strewn voids, the cosmic winds whipping at a crimson cape he didn't possess. He felt the satisfying heft of Mjolnir in a larger, more battle-hardened hand, and heard the echoes of booming laughter shared with comrades in a golden hall. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of lightning tingling in his fingertips, his mind reeling from the psychic residue of a life lived by a god. His waking hours were consumed by Toshinori's strict instructions. Practice. Control. Containment. He followed the plan with a desperate, obsessive focus. With Mjolnir in hand, he would sit cross-legged on his bedroom floor, his eyes squeezed shut in concentration, trying to summon not a bolt of lightning, but a single, controlled spark. The first few attempts were disastrous. The moment he tried to tap into the hammer's power, a surge of raw, untamed energy would flood his arm. The lights in his room would flicker violently. The electronics on his desk, his alarm clock, his computer, would fritz and reset. The air would crackle with a dangerous amount of static, making the hair on his arms stand on end. He had to slam his nascent control down, smothering the power before he blew every fuse in the apartment building. But slowly, painstakingly, he began to make progress. He learned that the power of the storm was tied intrinsically to his emotions. If he was panicked or frustrated, the energy was wild and unpredictable. But if he centered himself, focusing on the calm, resolute core of determination that had gotten him through the beach training, the power would respond in kind. It was like taming a wild beast not with a whip, but with quiet understanding. By the end of the first day, he could consistently summon a small, pea-sized ball of blue lightning that would hover silently above the hammer's head before fizzling out with a soft pop. It was a minuscule achievement, but it felt like a monumental victory. The true breakthrough, however, came on the second day. It was an accident. He was practicing the feeling of one for all. Following Toshinori's advice over the phone, he was trying to feel the immense reservoir of power that now resided within him, to let it flow through him without activating it. He pictured it as a warm, green river flowing through his veins. He sat there, Mjolnir resting on his lap, and focused on that inner warmth. As he did, he felt a familiar tingle from the hammer. He instinctively drew upon its calming, steadying energy to help him focus. And then, something incredible happened. The warm green river of One for All met the cool blue stream of Mjolnir's power not as a collision, but as a confluence. On his skin, faint, luminous lines appeared. They were not the jagged, angry red veins of an uncontrolled One for All activation. They were intricate, circuit-like patterns of brilliant, emerald green, tracing the path of his muscles. And intertwined with them, running parallel like a protective sheath, were identical circuits of crackling, sky-blue lightning. The two energies didn't just coexist, they synergized. The divine power of the storm seemed to act as a perfect, living insulator, containing the volatile, self-destructive energy of the stockpiled quirk. He felt it. He could draw on One for All, just a tiny fraction, and channel it. The power flowed into his limbs, but instead of the horrifying sensation of bones about to shatter, he felt a contained, humming thrum. The blue energy contained the green, focusing it, stabilizing it. One for All thunderclap cowling, he whispered, the name coming to him unbidden. He flexed his fingers. A tiny, controlled burst of green and blue energy sparked at his fingertips. He felt the power, a minuscule percentage of All Might's strength, ready to be unleashed, but his body felt fine. No pain. No threat of recoil. Just pure, controlled power. It was the key. It was the solution he and All Might had been desperately searching for. This miraculous fusion was how he could use one for all without turning his body into a broken mess. His call with Tashinori that evening was filled with a frantic, hopeful energy. All Might, it works! I can use it! The hammer's power, it's like a buffer. I can channel a little bit of one for all, maybe 5%, and the lightning holds it all together. I'm not going to break myself. On the other end of the line, Tashinori was silent for a long moment. Izuku could practically hear the gears turning in his mentor's head. This is beyond anything I could have imagined, my boy, Tashinori finally said, his voice a mixture of awe and deep-seated apprehension. A power that not only exists outside the realm of quirks but can actively synergize with and stabilize the most powerful quirk in existence. The implications are staggering. Be cautious, young Midoriya, you are playing with fire and lightning. Today, you created a controlled spark. Tomorrow, you could accidentally create a thunderstorm. The warning sobered Izuku, but it couldn't extinguish the flame of excitement in his chest. For the first time, he felt like he had a real chance. He wasn't just walking into the UA exam with a borrowed quirk he couldn't control. He was walking in with a secret weapon, too, in fact. He made a decision. He wouldn't use the hammer itself during the exam unless it was an absolute, life-or-death emergency. It was too risky. Too many witnesses. The questions it would raise would be catastrophic. He would rely on his new, fused power, Thunderclap Cowling. It would look like a single, flashy electrical quirk to any observer. He would keep Mjolnir hidden, a trump card of last resort. He packed it carefully at the bottom of his oversized yellow gym bag, wrapped in his sweaty training clothes. It was ridiculously heavy, adding a good 40 pounds to his load, but he couldn't bear the thought of leaving it behind. It felt like leaving a part of himself at home. The morning of the exam, he stood before the colossal gates of Yue High School, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The sheer scale of the building was awe-inspiring, a monument to the concept of heroism itself. He was surrounded by a sea of other hopefuls, all buzzing with nervous energy, their quirks subtly on display. A girl with pink skin, a boy with multiple arms, another with engines sputtering from his calves, and then there was him. Izuku Midoriya. The boy no one knew. The boy who, just a few months ago, wouldn't have even dared to dream of standing here. He clutched the straps of his gym bag, the hidden weight of Mjolnir a grounding presence. Out of my way, Deku! The voice, harsh and familiar, cut through his reverie like a shard of glass. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, not even deigning to look at him. His crimson eyes scanned the crowd with an arrogant dismissal, as if he'd already won. Izuku flinched back, the old instinct to make himself small and invisible kicking in. Deku. The useless one. The name still stung, a phantom pain from 1,000 childhood wounds, but as Bakugo stomped away, Izuku straightened his shoulders. Not anymore, he thought, a flicker of blue-green energy dancing in his eyes. I'm not that person anymore. He took a step forward, ready to enter the hallowed halls, and promptly tripped over his own feet, a classic Midoriya move. He flailed, his arms pinwheeling as he prepared to meet the pavement face first, but the impact never came. He stopped, hovering an inch from the ground, a strange, light sensation enveloping him. Whoa, are you okay? A cheerful, melodic voice asked. Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking, but it's a bad omen to fall on your face before you even start. He was gently righted onto his feet. He turned to see a girl with a round, friendly face, rosy cheeks, and a permanent bob of brown hair. She pressed the tips of her fingers together, and he felt his normal weight return. Oh. Thank you. It's just... I was nervous and... He stammered, his face flushing a brilliant red. I get it. I'm super nervous too, she said, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Well, good luck in there. She gave him a bright, encouraging smile before hurrying inside. Izuku stood there, his mind momentarily blanked by the simple, kind interaction. It was so different from what he was used to. He shook his head, a small, genuine smile on his face, and followed her in. The written exam was a blur of nerves and adrenaline. The practical exam orientation, led by the voice hero, Present Mike, was a high-energy assault on the senses. Izuku sat next to Bakugo, who shot him a venomous glare that clearly asked, "What the hell are you even doing here?" Izuku ignored him, focusing on the details of the exam. 3 types of villain robots, worth 1, 2, or 3 points respectively. The goal was to rack up as many points as possible by disabling them. A tall, serious-looking boy with engines in his legs stood up to chastise President Mike for a misprint in the handout, and then turned to point a rigid finger at Izuku. "And you, with the curly hair, you have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not going to take this seriously, then you should leave." The entire auditorium turned to stare at him. Izuku's face burned with humiliation. He sank down in his seat, wanting the floor to swallow him whole. So much for not being the same old Deku. But as they were herded towards the massive gates of the practical exam site, a sprawling, life-size replica of a city, he took a deep breath. The humiliation faded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It didn't matter what they thought. It only mattered what he could do. He set his heavy gym bag down near the entrance wall, Mjolnir safely concealed within. He wouldn't need it. The gates slammed open. "Gah!" President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. "The test has started. There are no countdowns in a real fight." While everyone else stood stunned for a second, Izuku reacted. He burst forward, leaving the confused pack behind. He was the first one into the city. He rounded a corner and came face to face with his first opponent, a 1-point robot, a green metal monstrosity on a single tread, its red optical sensor glowing menacingly. It lunged. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. Calm. Focus. 5%. He took a deep breath and activated it. One for all, thunderclap cowling! The world seemed to slow down. The intricate circuits of green and blue light erupted across his skin, a beautiful and terrifying sight. A low hum of contained power filled the air around him. He felt the strength of One for All surge into his legs, not as a bone-shattering force, but as a smooth, explosive burst of speed. He didn't just run, he flowed. He darted to the side, easily evading the robot's clumsy attack. The machine's metal arms slammed into the pavement where he'd been standing, shattering the asphalt. Without hesitation, Izuku spun around, his right fist crackling with focused energy. He didn't aim for a knockout blow. He aimed for a surgical strike. He punched the robot's central chassis. The impact was crisp and powerful. A controlled burst of blue-green lightning discharged from his knuckles, short-circuiting the machine's internal systems. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from its joints. 1 point. Izuku stared at his fist. It tingled with residual energy, but it wasn't broken. It wasn't even bruised. A wide, incredulous grin spread across his face. "It worked!" he gasped. "It actually worked!" This new reality galvanized him. He was no longer a liability. He was a contender. He took off running, his thunderclap cowling flickering around him as he conserved energy. He became a whirlwind of green and blue lightning. He was faster, more agile, and more precise than he ever could have been with raw, uncontrolled power. He found a 2-pointer menacing a group of other examinees. While they attacked its heavy armor with flashy but ineffective quirks, Izuku zipped past them, leaped onto the robot's back, and slammed an electrified palm onto its main power conduit, frying its systems instantly. 2 more points. He disabled a 3-pointer by using his enhanced speed to run circles around it, causing it to tear up its own motor functions trying to track him, before delivering the final, electrifying blow to its head. He was clumsy, his movements still unrefined, but he was effective. He was racking up points. He was actually doing it. From the observation room high above the city, a group of shadowy figures watched the monitors. "That kid, the one with the green and blue lightning, what's his quirk listed as?" a gruff voice asked. It was Shota Aizawa, the hero known as Eraserhead. Principal Nizu, an anthropomorphic creature who could be a mouse, a bear, or a dog, took a sip of his tea. His file is an interesting one. He was registered as quirkless for the first 15 years of his life. His quirk, listed as superpower, manifested only recently. A late bloomer then. Aizawa grunted, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. A very late, very powerful bloomer. That's not just a simple electricity quirk. Look at his speed, his physical power. It's like he has multiple abilities rolled into one. It seems illogical. All Might, present in his skeletal form, stood in the back of the room, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He watched his successor on the screen, a storm of pride and anxiety warring in his chest. He's doing it. He's controlling it. But be careful, my boy. Don't get cocky. Back in the city, Izuku had amassed a respectable 28 points. He was panting, the constant use of thunderclap cowling draining his stamina, but he felt incredible. He was finally proving himself. He was finally a hero. That's when the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire city block. From behind a skyscraper, a monster rose. The zero-pointer. It was less a robot and more a mobile catastrophe, a green metal behemoth that towered over the tallest buildings. Its single red eye scanned the cityscape, and its massive arms, capable of leveling entire districts, swept through the street, sending cars and debris flying. The message was clear: run. This was not a foe to be fought. It was an obstacle to be avoided. Panic erupted. The other examinees, who had been fighting with confident bravado moments before, turned and fled in a terrified stampede. It's the zero-pointer! Run for it! Izuku, his instincts screaming the same thing, turned to run with them. This was a test of judgment, and the right judgment was to get as far away as possible. He had his points. He just needed to survive. But then he heard a cry. Oof! My leg! He skidded to a halt, turning back towards the danger. His eyes widened. It was her. The kind, brown-haired girl from the entrance. A large piece of rubble, dislodged by the zero-pointer's rampage, had pinned her to the ground. She was trapped, directly in the path of the advancing mechanical titan. The zero-pointer's massive hand rose, preparing to smash down on the very spot where she lay. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Izuku saw her terrified face. He saw the descending shadow of the robot's fist. He heard the echo of the elderly woman's pained whisper from 2 nights ago. Please help. He looked at the fleeing students. He looked at the teachers who were surely watching but were too far away to intervene in time. He looked at the girl who had shown him a simple kindness when no one else would. In that moment, there were no points. There was no exam. There was only a person in danger. His mind went silent. The frantic calculations, the fear, the self-doubt, it all vanished, burned away by a single, incandescent purpose that was becoming the core of his very being. I have to save her. His body moved before he even made a conscious decision. He turned and ran not away from the zero-pointer, but directly towards it. The 5% of thunderclap cowling wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed everything. But even 100% of one for all might not be enough to destroy this thing, and it would undoubtedly shatter every bone in his body. He needed more than just raw power. He needed a focus. A conduit. A weapon. His gaze snapped towards the entrance of the exam site, half a city block away, where his yellow gym bag lay discarded against the wall. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. He reached out with his mind, with the part of his soul that was now inextricably linked to the ancient artifact. He reached for the thrumming, dormant power he had kept hidden. He called to it. A single, desperate, silent plea. Mjolnir! In the observation room, the screens flickered. What's happening? One of the teachers asked. Are we getting some kind of electrical interference? All Might's eyes widened in horror. He knew that interference. No, he whispered. He wouldn't. Not here. Not now. At the entrance to the battle site, the yellow gym bag began to vibrate. A low hum filled the air. With a tearing sound, the top of the bag ripped open. From within the pile of clothes, the dull gray head of the hammer emerged, glowing with a soft blue light. It hovered for a fraction of a second, and then it launched. It wasn't a flight. It was a teleportation disguised as movement. A streak of blue-white light, it shot from the entrance, a miniature comet breaking the sound barrier with a sharp crack. It tore through the artificial city, a blur of impossible speed, weaving around buildings, unerringly homing in on its target. Back in the shadow of the zero-pointer, Izuku was already in the air. He'd used thunderclap cowling to leap, 100 feet, 200 feet, launching himself towards the robot's massive head. He was a small green and blue comet on a collision course with a mountain. As he reached the apex of his jump, his right hand outstretched, the streak of light met him. The leather-wrapped handle of Mjolnir slammed into his palm with a familiarity that felt both ancient and brand new. Thwump. The connection was instantaneous. The power that flooded him was not the controlled 5% he had been using. It was the full, untamed fury of the storm god, merging with the cataclysmic, stockpiled energy of 8 generations of heroes. The green and blue circuits of thunderclap cowling exploded into a blinding vortex of incandescent power that engulfed his entire body. He was no longer a boy. He was a living tempest. He looked at the zero-pointer's massive, impassive face. He saw the red, glowing eye, the size of a bus. He saw the descending fist that was about to crush the girl below. He channeled everything. 100%. Not of one for all alone, but of everything. The legacy of his heroes. The power of a god. The desperate, burning need to save one person. Storm. For all. Smay awash! He roared, his voice amplified by a peal of thunder, and swung the hammer. The world turned white. The impact was silent for a microsecond, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, the sound wave hit. It was not a punch. It was the birth of a star. A cataclysmic, world-shattering boom that shattered every window in a 10-block radius. A flash of pure, unadulterated green and blue energy erupted from the point of impact, so bright it bleached all color from the world. The zero-pointer's head didn't just dent or crumple. It atomized. The shockwave of the blow, a visible distortion in the air, traveled down the robot's body, tearing its armored plates from its chassis. The entire upper torso of the colossal machine simply ceased to exist, vaporized by a power it was never designed to withstand. The rest of the behemoth crumpled, a hollowed-out shell, and collapsed in on itself with the groaning shriek of a dying leviathan. In the observation room, everyone was thrown back from the monitors as they overloaded, going dark with a shower of sparks. The entire building had shaken from the force of the blow. What in the name of... Aizawa breathed, staring at the now blank screens, his usual stoicism completely shattered. All Might was clutching his chest, a trickle of blood dripping from his mouth, his eyes wide with a terror that eclipsed anything he'd ever felt facing All for One. What have you unleashed, my boy? High in the air, the backlash hit Izuku. The fused power had protected his bones from the force of One for All, but the sheer kinetic energy of the impact was immense. He was thrown backwards, tumbling through the air like a ragdoll. His limbs were intact, but his body was completely drained, every cell screaming from the overload. His consciousness flickered. He was falling. From hundreds of feet up. He was going to die. As his vision started to tunnel to black, he saw the kind-faced girl below him. She had pushed the rubble off her leg and was looking up at him, her hands outstretched. She slapped him on the chest. The terrifying sensation of falling vanished, replaced by the gentle, weightless feeling from before. His descent slowed to a soft, floating drift. He landed on the pavement with the grace of a falling leaf, Mjolnir clattering to the ground beside him. Then, the world went dark. He awoke to silence. The frantic energy of the exam was gone. The air was still. He was lying on the ground, a crowd of the other examinees standing in a wide, silent circle around him. They weren't looking at him with pity or scorn. They were staring with a mixture of profound shock, terror, and unadulterated awe. They were looking at the impossible wreckage of the zero-pointer. They were looking at the ancient, unblemished war hammer lying on the asphalt next to him. And they were looking at the boy who had just wielded a power that defied all explanation, a power that didn't just seem heroic, but utterly, terrifyingly divine. Bakugo stood at the edge of the crowd, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, trembling. His face, usually a mask of arrogant rage, was pale and slack-jawed. His crimson eyes were fixed on Izuku, on the hammer. He was seeing the quirkless, worthless Deku he had tormented his whole life lying next to a weapon that had just casually obliterated the unbeatable foe. The foundations of his world, built on the simple premise that he was the strongest, had just been leveled with more finality than the zero-pointer. Izuku's head swam. He pushed himself up, his body aching, and reached for Mjolnir. The moment his fingers touched the handle, a comforting, familiar hum resonated through him. The UA entrance exam was over, but for Izuku Midoriya, the real test had just begun. He had saved the girl. He had passed the exam. And in doing so, he had revealed a secret that would change everything. The fallout from the UA entrance exam was not a storm, but a quiet, deeply unsettling seismic event that sent tremors through the very foundations of the institution. In the immediate aftermath, there was chaos. Recovery Girl was bustling around, tending to the girl with the sprained ankle, Achiko Uraraka. Izuku had learned her name was, and checking on Izuku himself, who was miraculously unharmed save for profound exhaustion. The other examinees were ushered away, their minds reeling, their hushed, frantic whispers creating a buzz of disbelief. "Did you see that? What kind of quirk even is that?" He called the hammer to him. "Like it was alive! The 0-pointer, it just vanished." Izuku, his head still swimming, had hastily hidden Mjolnir back in his now torn gym bag before the teachers descended. He felt their eyes on him, a mixture of suspicion, awe, and deep, professional curiosity. He offered them a weak, shaky smile and mumbled apologies for the power surge, an explanation so flimsy it was almost insulting. But in the face of the impossible evidence, the vaporized multi-story robot, no one knew what to say. The true storm broke later, behind the closed doors of Principal Nisa's office. The room, with its panoramic view of the school grounds, was a bubble of tense silence. Nisa sat behind his large desk, his beady eyes betraying nothing but calm intelligence. Shota Aizawa, his arms crossed and his expression a thundercloud of skepticism, leaned against the wall. And Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, stood near the window, looking out at the setting sun with a deeply troubled gaze. On the principal's desk, a high-definition monitor displayed a looped, slow-motion replay of the event. The footage was grainy, distorted by the sheer energy output, but the sequence was undeniable. Izuku Midoriya, wreathed in a vortex of green and blue light. The impossible streak of a second object flying across the city. The war hammer slamming into his waiting hand. The final, cataclysmic swing that produced a blast of power far exceeding anything ever recorded from a first-year applicant. "So," Aizawa began, his voice a low, gravelly drawl that cut through the silence. "Let's address the sentient, lightning-wielding hammer in the room. His file says superpower. A recent manifestation. That is an insult to our intelligence, all might." He didn't phrase it as a question. His gaze, sharp and accusatory, was fixed on Toshinori. "You recommended him. You trained him. What is he?" Toshinori let out a long, weary sigh, the weight of the universe seeming to press down on his frail shoulders. He knew this was coming. He and Izuku had agreed on a heavily redacted version of the truth, a story that bent reality just enough to avoid shattering it completely. "His quirk did manifest late, Aizawa," Toshinori said, his voice carefully measured. "It is a powerful energy stockpiling quirk. Unstable. Difficult to control. The hammer," he said the word as if it tasted foreign, "is a separate matter. A support item. One he crafted himself to help him channel the destructive recoil of his power." Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Crafted himself? It looked ancient. And it flew into his hand from half a kilometer away. "Are you telling me a 15-year-old boy with no engineering background built a semi-sentient, flying, lightning-channeling support weapon in his garage?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm. "That's not just illogical, it's absurd." "Perhaps crafted was the wrong word," Nisa interjected smoothly, steepling his pause. "Perhaps found is more accurate. And attuned more so than crafted. A support item that responds to his quirk's specific biosignature, perhaps? The world is full of strange objects and forgotten technologies from the pre-quirk era. It is not outside the realm of possibility." The principal's eyes glinted with an intense, analytical curiosity. He was enjoying the puzzle, the sheer glorious strangeness of it. Aizawa was not appeased. "He has two quirks. That's the simplest explanation. The stockpiling one, and some form of advanced telekinesis linked to an electrical discharge. A dual-factor quirk of unprecedented power that conveniently manifested just before the exam for the most prestigious hero school in the country." He pushed himself off the wall. "I don't like it. It's too neat, and too messy, all at once. I'll be watching him closely. With that, he turned and left the office, the door closing with a soft, final click. Toshinori let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They had bought themselves time, but he knew Aizawa's skepticism would be a constant, pressing threat. He is more than just a puzzle, isn't he, Toshinori? Niza said quietly, his gaze now fixed on the symbol of peace. Toshinori met the principal's intelligent eyes. Niza saw far more than any human did. There was no point in complete denial. Yes, Toshinori admitted, his voice low. He is. And the truth is far more complicated than even Aizawa suspects. I thought so, Niza said, a thoughtful hum in his throat. He switched off the monitor. Well, he passed. Spectacularly, 0 rescue points for his actions in saving Miss Uraraka, and an unprecedented 60 villain points from the other staff members who were so impressed by his final attack that they awarded him the highest possible score out of sheer shock. He will be in Class 1A. We will watch, we will learn, and we will guide him, this year. The principal added, a hint of manic glee in his voice. Promises to be exceptionally educational. Miles away, in a place far removed from the hallowed halls of UA, another was watching. The penthouse suite was the pinnacle of Tokyo luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, God's-eye view of the sprawling city, a glittering tapestry of light and life. The decor was a study in minimalist opulence, sleek black marble, chrome accents, and furniture that looked more like art than something to be sat upon. A man stood before the window, his back to the room. He was tall and slender, with a predator's grace. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. His hair was the color of jet, slicked back from a high, intelligent forehead. In one hand he swirled a glass of amber liquid, a vintage scotch that cost more than most people's cars. In the other, he held a sleek, wafer-thin tablet. On its screen was the same footage that had been dissected in Niza's office. It was a pirated feed, easily acquired, from the UA servers. The man, whose handsome face was currently twisted in a smirk of amused contempt, watched the climax of the exam for the 10th time. He zoomed in on the moment the hammer met the boy's hand, the moment the vortex of power erupted. "Oh, brother!" The man drawled to the empty room, his voice a silken baritone with a faint, unplaceable accent. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic. But to bestow your favorite toy upon this," he gestured dismissively at the image of Izuku Midoriya, a scrawny, terrified-looking child who was the physical antithesis of the brawny, boisterous god he remembered. "A mortal whelp. A sniveling, teary-eyed little Midgardian. This is what passes for worthy in your absence. How far the standards have fallen." He took a slow sip of his scotch, the corner of his lip curling. This was more than just an amusing novelty. It was an insult. Mjolnir was a symbol of Asgardian might, the birthright of the Odinson. For it to be wielded by a common human child was a profanation, a stain on his family's legacy. His family. The thought brought a bitter taste to his mouth that had nothing to do with the whiskey. He, Loki, god of mischief, had spent centuries in the shadow of that hammer. He had seen it level mountains, shatter armies, and humble kings, and now, its immense power was being used to smash toys in a mortal preparatory school. The sheer indignity of it was galling. But beneath the offense, a seed of curiosity was planted. How could this boy, this nothing, be worthy? Thor's enchantment was powerful, tied to Odin's own Gungnir. It wasn't something that could be tricked or circumvented. The boy had to possess some quality, some kernel of nobility that the hammer recognized. Loki's smirk widened. An idea, sharp and wicked, began to form in his mind. Perhaps this wasn't an insult after all. Perhaps it was an opportunity. An opportunity for a little fun. To test this new hero. To see what this supposed worthiness was truly made of. To poke and prod at it until it, inevitably, shattered. "Let's see how worthy you are, little champion," he murmured to the face on the screen. "When the world stops playing by the rules." He set his glass down. It was time to pull a few strings. The first day of class at UA was a whirlwind of anxiety and surrealism for Izuku. Finding himself in Class 1A, the same class as the intimidating engine-legged boy, Tenya Ida, and the explosive Bakugo was terrifying enough. Bakugo had cornered him before homeroom, his crimson eyes burning with a furious, confused fire. "Deku!" he had snarled, his voice a low growl. "What the hell was that?" "In the exam. That wasn't your quirk. You don't have a quirk. What did you do?" Izuku, his heart hammering, had stammered the prepared lie. It's a late manifestation, Kakin. And the hammer is just a support item to help me handle the recoil. Bakugo stared at him, his expression a storm of disbelief and rage. He looked like he wanted to blast Izuku through the wall, but something held him back. It was the memory of the sheer, overwhelming power he had witnessed. For the first time in their lives, Bakugo was faced with a version of Izuku he couldn't understand, couldn't intimidate, and couldn't dismiss. It was a paradigm shift that left him furious and, deep down, afraid. He had simply sneered, "Liar!" and stalked away. Their homeroom teacher, the very same Shota Aizawa who had voiced his suspicions to the principal, was even more intimidating. He immediately herded them outside for a quirk assessment test, threatening the last-place student with expulsion. Panic seized Izuku. A test of raw quirk power? He had only just learned to control Thunderclap Cowling at a mere 5%. How could he compete with students who had spent their whole lives mastering their abilities? As he stepped up for the 50-meter dash, he took a deep breath. Calm. Focus. Just like in my room. He activated his cowling, the green and blue circuits flaring to life. He burst from the starting line, a controlled explosion of speed, finishing the dash in just over 3 seconds. It was a respectable time, but not superhuman. The grip strength test was next. He channeled the cowling into his hand and squeezed. The device beeped, reading 120 kilograms. Strong for a teenager, but nothing compared to the Mizo Shoji, who registered over 500. He was holding back. He knew it. But the fear of losing control, of revealing too much under Aizawa's watchful eye, was a powerful restraint. Then came the ball throw. This was the test that had broken him in his middle school fitness exams, where he'd scored pathetically. It was a symbol of his powerlessness. "Midoriya! You're up!" Aizawa called, his tone bored but his eyes sharp. Izuku walked to the circle, a softball in his hand. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, especially Bakugo's. He knew what they were thinking. They had seen his city-leveling punch in the exam. They were expecting a repeat. Aizawa's voice cut through his thoughts. "You scored 705 meters in middle school, correct?" Izuku flinched at the unexpected question, nodding mutely. "And yet, in the entrance exam, you displayed a power capable of catastrophic destruction, a power you seem hesitant to use now. Are you planning on incapacitating yourself again, Midoriya? Do you expect someone else to save you every time you decide to go all out?" Izuku's blood ran cold. Aizawa knew. He knew about the recoil, about his lack of control. A hero who is a one-trick pony, a single-use bomb, is a liability on the battlefield. Aizawa continued, his eyes glowing a faint, menacing red, his scarf beginning to float around him. "You cannot be a hero if you cannot control your power." He was being tested. This wasn't just about the ball throw. This was about his entire future at UA. Izuku took a deep breath. He had to prove him wrong. He had to show him he could be a hero, that he had control. He couldn't use 100%. That would break his finger and prove Aizawa's point. But he couldn't just use 5% either. He needed to do something more. Something focused. He remembered his training. The synergy. The blue lightning containing the green. He reared back, and instead of letting one for all flood his entire arm, he focused all of it, every ounce of power he could safely channel with his cowling, into a single point, the tip of his index finger. Like flicking a bottle cap, he thought. All the force, none of the breakage. He threw the ball. As it left his hand, he flicked his finger forward, unleashing the concentrated burst of power. A miniature sonic boom cracked the air. The ball became a green and blue comet, soaring into the sky with a tail of displaced air behind it. It went up, and up, and up, disappearing into a tiny speck before finally falling back to Earth. His finger throbbed with a dull ache, but it wasn't broken. It was bruised, purple and swollen but intact. He had controlled it. Aizawa held up his phone. The screen read, 705.3 meters. A murmur went through the class. He had beaten Bakugo's score. Bakugo himself looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. DKU! You bastard! Tell me how you did that or you're dead, he roared, lunging forward, explosions crackling in his palms. Before he could reach Izuku, he was ensnared in Aizawa's capture weapon. Stand down, the teacher said, his voice deadly calm, his eyes glowing red. And stop acting like a child. He turned his crimson gaze back to Izuku. The glow faded. Not bad. Aizawa grunted, a statement that, from him, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. You're not entirely useless, but you still have zero control over the output. Your finger is a mess. You have potential, but potential is meaningless without refinement. Don't make me regret letting you stay. Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He had passed. He had proven his point, but as he looked at his swollen finger, a new, more difficult problem presented itself. He couldn't just rely on Mjolnir as a crutch to contain one for all. He had to learn to master the quirk on its own merits. The hammer was a secret, a last resort. It couldn't be his only path to heroism. The rest of the day was a blur of normal classes. But as Izuku sat in English class, he felt a strange sensation. It was a faint, low hum in his bones, a familiar thrumming that had nothing to do with one for all. He glanced at his gym bag, which he'd kept with him. Mjolnir was restless. It was sensing something. A faint, prickling sensation, like the static before a lightning strike, danced at the edge of his perception. It wasn't a sense of immediate danger, but of wrongness. Of something ancient and unnatural nearby. He tried to ignore it, chalking it up to his overactive nerves. But the feeling persisted, a low, background hum of cosmic static. The next day, the feeling was stronger. It was during their foundational heroics class, taught by All Might himself. The class was a trial by fire, the battle trial. Students would be paired into hero and villain teams, fighting over a mock nuclear weapon in a training building. Izuku was paired with the nice girl from the exam, Achiko Uraraka. Their opponents, to Izuku's profound horror, were Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. As they prepared, All Might pulled Izuku aside. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice a low whisper. Aizawa is suspicious. Bakugo is a powder keg waiting for a spark. You must not, under any circumstances, use the hammer. Rely only on what you have learned. Show them control. Show them strategy. A hero's greatest weapon is their mind. Izuku nodded, his face grim. I understand, All Might. But even as he said it, the humming in his bones intensified. Mjolnir, locked away in his locker, was agitated. The feeling of wrongness was stronger now, closer. He could almost taste the ozone in the air. The battle began. Bakugo, consumed by a lifetime of rage and a newfound sense of inadequacy, abandoned the mission objective immediately. He hunted Izuku through the halls of the building, his only goal to beat, humiliate, and force the truth out of his childhood rival. Come out, Deku! He roared, blasting doors off their hinges. Stop hiding and face me! Show me that power you used in the exam! The real one! Izuku and Uraraka were on the defensive, forced to retreat and strategize. Izuku knew he couldn't win a head-on fight with Bakugo. Not with only 5% of his power. He had to outthink him. The confrontation was inevitable. Bakugo cornered him in a hallway. The fight was brutal and one-sided. Izuku, using his cowling for evasion, dodged and weaved, but Bakugo was a prodigy of combat, his explosions a terrifyingly versatile weapon. He was faster, more experienced, and driven by a pure, white-hot fury. You've been lying to me your whole life! Bakugo screamed, blasting a chunk of wall out next to Izuku's head. You had a powerful quirk all this time, and you just let me think you were a worthless pebble on the side of the road. You were laughing at me, weren't you? No, Kaken! That's not it! Izuku pleaded, dodging another blast. But his words were lost in the storm of Bakugo's rage. Bakugo pulled the pin on his grenade-like gauntlet, a support item designed to store his nitroglycerin-like sweat for a massive, focus blast. Young Bakugo, no! You'll kill him! All Might yelled into the comms from the observation room. He'll be fine if he dodges! Bakugo screamed back, and unleashed hell. A massive, building-shaking explosion tore through the hallway. Izuku, barely managing to throw himself behind a concrete pillar, was thrown across the room by the shockwave, his costume shredded, his body bruised and battered. He lay there, his ears ringing, the taste of dust and blood in his mouth. He was outmatched. Bakugo was preparing for another, final blast, and the humming. The humming from Mjolnir was now a roar in his soul. It was screaming at him. Not because of Bakugo, but because of something else. Something in the room. Something that didn't belong. As Bakugo charged forward, his hand crackling, Izuku's eyes darted around the room. He saw it. A flicker. In the corner of the hallway, a shimmer in the air, like heat haze. A distortion. His new, hammer-enhanced senses screamed at him. Magic. Deception. Illusion. He understood. The rage Bakugo was feeling, it was real, but it was being amplified. Poked. Prodded. Like someone was pouring gasoline on a fire. He is not your real enemy. A voice whispered in his mind. It was not his own thought. It was the hammer's silent counsel. The true foe is the one you cannot see. Izuku's plan, the one he and Uraraka had devised, crystallized. It was no longer just about winning the exercise. It was about ending this manipulated conflict. He stood up, facing Bakugo. He raised his arms in a defensive posture, a mirror of their first ever fight as children. But instead of channeling power into his fist for a punch, he aimed his left arm at the ceiling above Bakugo. Uraraka-san, now! He yelled into his comm. He unleashed a full, 5% smash upwards. The force shattered the floor above them, sending a shower of debris raining down. At the same time, Uraraka, on the floor above, used her zero-gravity quirk on a massive concrete pillar, and using a piece of capture tape as a bat, swung it down through the newly created hole. It was the ultimate feint. While Bakugo was distracted by the falling debris, Uraraka floated over the gaping hole and touched the weapon, securing victory for the hero team. But Izuku's move had a second purpose. He hadn't just aimed at the ceiling. He had aimed the shockwave of his punch directly at the spot where he'd seen the shimmer. The blast of pure one-for-all energy, uncontained by lightning, ripped through the air. The spot where the illusion had been wavered violently. For a single, fleeting microsecond, a figure was revealed, a tall, slender man in a fine suit, his face a mask of annoyed surprise. Then he vanished. The humming in Izuku's soul stopped. Bakugo stood amidst the rubble, stunned, defeated, and utterly confused. The unnatural, amplified rage receded, leaving only the bitter, hollow feeling of his own inadequacy. Izuku clutched his right arm, which had taken the brunt of the recoil from his punch. It was throbbing, a deep purple, but not broken. He had won. He had survived. But as he was taken to Recovery Girl, a chilling realization dawned on him. Someone had been there. Someone with a power that felt like Mjolnir's. Someone who wasn't a hero or a student. Someone who had been watching, manipulating, and testing. A whisper in the thunder. A new, unknown, and terrifying player had just revealed their hand. And Izuku Midoriya was, for reasons he couldn't possibly comprehend, the pawn at the very center of their game.